We finally got a reveal trailer for the long-anticipated Resident Evil 9. Now, not only is this very exciting, it seems like Resident Evil is finally going back to its horror roots, but the trailer contains some very big clues to the plot of the game and potentially the future of the series. Hello lore fans, my name is Tericho, and after watching that Resident Evil 9 trailer, I am very excited to play it. Now, the trailer gives us quite a lot, but we are left with some pretty big questions. Who is Grace? Why are we going back to Raccoon City after all of these years? And who is this mystery hooded man? Well, I think the trailer gives us some pretty big clues to all of these questions and more. And I might just have a good theory on who this mystery man could be. Let's get into it. Now, before we get into the breakdown of the trailer, the name of this game already gives us some clues. Resident Evil 9 is called Requiem. This continues the tradition started by Resident Evil 7 of using the number in the name. Requiem now using the Q as a 9 was quite clever. I bet you Resident Evil 10 is going to be called Double Helix. But this name also has a clever little meaning. The word Requiem comes from a Roman Catholic ceremony to honor the dead, a Mass of the dead. The phrase Requiem aeternam dona eis domine, I don't speak Latin, so I'm sorry if I got that wrong, translates to grant them eternal rest, Lord. Now, as we'll come onto later, this ties into the theme of the game quite well. The main character Grace lost her mother, but the game also returns to the iconic Raccoon City, a very important location in the series, but also a literal city of the dead, both during the outbreak being full of the living dead and now being completely dead after being bombed at the end of Resident Evil 3. Either way, a lot of people died here, and it seems like those deaths haven't stopped all those years later. Now, the trailer begins outside of a Federal Bureau of Investigation building. Now, I don't think this is a real FBI site. Many Resident Evil games have made up areas that are loosely based on real-world locations. The original Raccoon City was a fictional place, and Resident Evil 4 was set somewhere in Europe, just as two examples. But keep this in mind for later, because I actually think there is a clue here that might just confirm some old fan theories. Once inside, we see Nathan Dempsey, special agent in charge, walk through the busy offices. Now, it makes sense that the FBI in the Resident Evil world would be constantly swamped. Every 5 minutes there's a new outbreak or bioterrorism threat. Of course, the offices just had to have the iconic green herb, something that fans of the game should be very familiar with by now. Before we meet our new protagonist, we get a glimpse of the case she's working on. This one shows a victim of an unidentified disease which seems to be linked to a number of disappearances. Knowing Resident Evil, there is likely more to this story. This man was likely put through some sort of experimentation, or possibly the victim of a bioweapon. Fun fact, the case ID matches a real FBI case. That one was for a counter-terrorism case in 2001. This is most likely just a coincidence, but the major theme of the game since Resident Evil 3 is the fight against bioweapon terrorism. The FBI in the Resident Evil world are likely heavily involved in this fight, so this is a cool little coincidence. We then get to meet presumably this game's protagonist, Grace Ashcroft. If that name seemed familiar to you, she's actually the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft. Alyssa was a journalist and one of the playable characters who survived Raccoon City in Resident Evil Outbreak. Outbreak is one of the less well-known Resident Evil games, as it released for the PS2 in Japan in 2003 and the rest of the world in 2004. This game was actually built with co-op in mind, designed to be played online with players working together to survive several locations across Raccoon City and beyond. However, this was far before online gaming was common, and most people ended up playing Outbreak solo. While it was definitely playable, the AI were questionable on how helpful they would be at times. This led to Outbreak being a particularly challenging game in a genre that was already known for being fairly difficult. Despite all of that, I really liked the games, and they added a lot more lore and backstory to the world of Resident Evil. One such backstory is how Alyssa actually witnessed Umbrella's experiments before the Raccoon City outbreak of 1998. Alyssa's fellow journalist and friend Kurt had suspicions that a hospital just outside Raccoon City limits was testing experimental drugs on their patients. Patients were frequently dying after visiting, and a shady company was supplying drugs to the hospital. Kurt reported this to the Raccoon City Police Department, but was frustrated after they failed to take any action. Now, of course, we know that the reason why is that the RPD was being run by the corrupt Chief of Police, Brian Irons. Not only was Irons taking bribes from Umbrella, but he had his own shady past as well. This wasn't the only thing that Brian Irons turned a blind eye to, as Umbrella had multiple projects spread across the city. Alyssa and Kurt decided to investigate the hospital themselves. While there, Kurt was attacked by Dorothy Lester. Dorothy was dying of cancer. Her husband Al had agreed to put her into an experimental trial. However, this trial was actually an experiment with a strain of the T-virus, the same virus that was unleashed on Raccoon City across Resident Evil 1 to 3. Now, this particular strain of the T-virus was designed to target cancer cells, and at first, it did work. After treatment, Dorothy appeared healthy again. However, it wasn't long before the virus started to mutate her and she started to zombify. Kurt was infected and partially eaten, turning into a zombie himself. Alyssa survived this incident, although the Umbrella researcher in charge of the hospital carried out a procedure to wipe her memories of the event. This is likely why she experienced headaches years later. Alyssa did regain her memories in Outbreak File 2, and after surviving the Raccoon City outbreak, she tried to use her journalism career to expose Umbrella and their bioweapon research. Now, we also got a small nod to Alyssa in Resident Evil 7. Ethan can find a newspaper article written by her that talks about a series of missing people in Louisiana, the state where the Baker House was located. It makes sense that Alyssa would have a personal stake in such cases. Many of the Raccoon City survivors ended up fighting against bioterrorism in one way or another. But we now know that unfortunately, this investigation led to her death. We learned from Nathan that Alyssa was murdered in the Wrenwood Hotel. This is likely going to be one of the main locations of Resident Evil 9, and it definitely has a Spencer Mansion vibe to it. Now Nathan tells Grace that another body has turned up. He mentions the word pathology, meaning that this victim was infected with something just like the ones Grace has been investigating. Now it's clear that Grace still holds some trauma from her mother's murder. In fact, we can see by looking at her desk that she's clearly taking on far more cases than you would expect. She also eats takeout at her desk, showing how she's thrown herself into her work. This is likely a personal vendetta for her, and it makes me wonder how much Alyssa told her daughter before she died. Is this drive an attempt to stop bioterrorism, knowing how powerful Umbrella were before Raccoon City, or is it an attempt to avenge her mother's murder? Maybe a little bit of both. Also to note here, Grace wears a wristwatch very similar to her mother, maybe a trait passed down from mother to daughter, or perhaps this was even her mother's watch that Grace keeps to remember her by. Also, keep this watch in mind because this might actually be a massive clue to the mystery hooded man that we see later. In one of the most exciting reveals in the trailer, we get to see the ruins of Raccoon City. This is the first time we have properly seen it after the original trilogy, and this is what is left of it after it was bombed at the end of Resident Evil 3. The US military, in an attempt to contain the outbreak, dropped bombs right in the center of the city. Now, depending on which version you watch, it's ambiguous as to how much of the city was actually destroyed. The original RE3 and its remake implied that the entire city was flattened, but now we see that there are still a fair few buildings left standing. Even the RPD is still recognizable, although not in a great shape. In fact, we can see the bus that Leon or Claire had to fight through in Resident Evil 2 still outside the RPD gates. Now, while this implies that there were very few, if any, human survivors, this might be hinting that some bioweapons or infected humans could have survived. In fact, I think the trailer is hinting at exactly that. We see a monster later on in the trailer that far more resembles a T or a G virus monster. Later Resident Evil games show much more elaborate monsters. They often retain some form of their intelligence. Even the villagers in Resident Evil 4 can still talk. The majority of those infected with the T or G virus, though, become much more animalistic. The zombies in Raccoon City are much more beast-like compared to those infected with the last plaguers in Resident Evil 4. Now, personally, I like the older infected much more. I find them to be a lot scarier and more threatening to face. Now, this monster looks just like something out of Raccoon City. Its face especially reminds me of the zombies in the original games. Now, some people have speculated that we might see Lisa Trevor again. Lisa was a new character added for the RE1 remake, and she's a fan favorite character. Her whereabouts are also unknown. She was last seen in the Spencer Mansion, which is just outside of Raccoon City. Owing to the fact that we can hear chains in the background and Lisa was known to have been shackled, people have speculated that this could be Lisa. Now, as I said earlier, this trailer might just have confirmed an old fan theory of the series. As I said, it looks like we will finally be revisiting Raccoon City after its destruction, but we've never actually had a concrete answer on where Raccoon City is. The games often hint that it's a Midwestern city, but it's never given a proper location, not even which state it's in. Now, there have been many fan theories over the years. Obviously, Raccoon City isn't real, but people have speculated that it could be based on real places. Now, people have guessed cities all over America, but one of the most popular fan theories is that Raccoon City is based on Springfield, Missouri, mostly due to the shape of the two cities and Springfield having areas to its north that could resemble the Arklay Mountains. But here is where things get very interesting. We see a map at Grace's desk that shows a city with a river running through it. Now, that could be any number of US cities, but St. Louis in Missouri looks like it could be a match. But if Raccoon City is indeed inspired by Springfield, Missouri, then it could make sense that many of those who were evacuated, or in Alyssa's case escaped the city, might just have migrated and settled into one of the two big nearby cities. Perhaps this man is just one more of those Raccoon City survivors, and now people have started going missing in the areas surrounding the ruins of Raccoon City. But if you aren't convinced, we know that the hotel that Alyssa was murdered in was called the Wrenwood Hotel. Now, there are quite a few places in the US with the name Wrenwood, but there are no fewer than 4 in St. Louis. There is even a street named Wrenwood right outside of Springfield, Missouri. Again, if Raccoon City was based on Springfield, then this Wrenwood Hotel might be just outside of that ruined city. That could explain why it looks so run down. Now, finally, I took a closer look at the FBI building we saw at the start of the trailer and compared it to all of the real-world ones. Now, none of them are a match, but the closest one is absolutely St. Louis, Missouri. These two-tone glass panels look very similar to this real-world FBI building, so I'm guessing that this one is based in Missouri. But this actually starts to paint a geographical picture. If Raccoon City was indeed in Missouri, you can see how the effects of Raccoon City might have spread out across the neighboring areas, kind of like a virus. Later on, we see Grace wake up strapped upside down to a table. A nice little touch here is that she has blue eyes just like her mother, but the most interesting part is that it seems like someone is taking her blood. Now, why are they taking her blood? Now, this is completely theory territory, but I think I have a good explanation. In Resident Evil Outbreak, all of the surviving characters were infected. This was actually a key mechanic of the games, acting like a timer. The longer you spent in each mission, the more likely you were to succumb to the virus, and this only sped up each time you took damage from enemies. Now, the Outbreak games have multiple endings, but since we know that Alyssa did survive, that means she would have had to have had her virus treated. We know that several cures exist for many of the older viruses in the games, so logically, Alyssa would have had treatment for her infection. However, we know that the viruses created by Umbrella are incredibly stubborn. It's very likely that some of that T-virus still remained in Alyssa, and there is a good chance that it was passed down onto her daughter. Now, I actually think this could explain everything we've seen in the trailer. This man seems to be carrying out experiments on his victims. They're all found dead, but they all seem infected with something. Now, we know we're going back to Raccoon City, but why? Why would we visit the ruins of this city? Well, it's possible that this man was looking for samples of the T-virus, and since plenty of these buildings are still standing, well, perhaps there are still ways to find it. Remember, a lot of these monsters created by the T and G viruses can take a lot of punishment. There's a good chance that this man was looking for samples of the virus in the city, but after failing to find what he needed, he realized he could find those samples in the living people who had been cured. That could explain why he calls Grace
The special one, the chosen one. Miss Ashcroft.
Grace carrying traces of the T-virus unknowingly passed down by her mother. This could even explain why her mother was killed in the first place, this man trying to get that sample from her blood. Now, this could also explain why Grace has these intense flashbacks and what seem like memories of her mother's perspective. It might not just be trauma, it could be her body fighting against the virus inside her. Now, this brings me on to the biggest question of the trailer. Who exactly is this mysterious hooded figure? Well, he could be a surviving member of Raccoon City, possibly even a surviving member of Umbrella. But I think I have a very good theory on who he could be, and no, let's get this out of the way, he's not Albert Wesker. Not only does he not have Wesker's blonde hair or accent, but he also doesn't act like Wesker at all. This guy hides in the shadows, whereas Wesker is all about theatrics. Plus, Wesker was incredibly powerful before he died in RE5, he wouldn't be grappling with a human like this. No, in fact, I think there is a really cool candidate that would be an awesome twist. RE9 is clearly tied into Outbreak. We are playing as the daughter of one of the playable characters of those games, and it's clear we're going to be revisiting the past in Raccoon City. Well, what if this mystery man is also a survivor of Raccoon City, but also someone that Grace's mother knew? Of all the playable characters in Outbreak, there is one that could absolutely match this character: George Hamilton. George was a doctor who worked in Raccoon City during the Outbreak, but if you compare these two characters, they have a lot in common. This man clearly has some medical training. We can see that from the medical procedure he's carrying out on Grace. He's also very well spoken and looks like he comes from wealth. George, being a doctor, was very well dressed and well spoken. He also had money. But most interestingly of all, he collects watches. That might just have been a small hint there all the way back at the start of the trailer. I wonder if George might have kept Alyssa's watch after he killed her. But one more clue, in the game George can unlock an outfit called Outdoor Expert. The color is different, but this does look just like what this man is wearing. George was known to enjoy camping and hiking, and one of his special abilities in the game was to tackle zombies. So clearly he would be able to do what we see the man do in the trailer. George was infected just like Alyssa, so that could explain why he looks the way that he does. Maybe he got the cure later than Alyssa did, the T-virus doing more damage to him in that time. Now he also has a good potential for a villain story. He was overworked and stressed in Raccoon City due to his job as a doctor, but also from his wife divorcing him. He's believed to romanticize his own profession, and he learned of a cure to the T-virus known as Daylight. I wonder if this is George, after years of infection and his own mental state eroding, trying to develop his own cure. He did, after all, specialize in virology. Now, one final thing that could make this more likely is the relationship system in RE Outbreak. Different characters have different relationships with the others. Some get along more than others do. But there were two characters that George didn't get along with: Yoko Suzuki and, you guessed it, Alyssa Ashcroft. If George has spent all these years suffering with his own mental health on top of living with the effects of the T-virus, then I could absolutely see him turning villain. Perhaps he believes he's the only person who can replicate the T-virus cure. Perhaps he's even trying to reverse the damage done to himself, now so desperate that he's willing to kill others to do so. Now, I also think that Resident Evil 9 is being set up to bridge the gap between the last few games and the older ones. Resident Evil has this weird tradition where every 3 games the series completely changes. The first 3 games were all set in Raccoon City, revolved around the T and G viruses, with 3 ending with Raccoon City's destruction. 4, 5, and 6 all followed the Raccoon City survivors as they each battled remnants of Umbrella across the globe and also uncovered more of the origins of the company and its research, this time fighting against more parasitical enemies with the Las Plagas and the Ouroboros. Now 7 and 8 have followed almost a completely separate story. The last 2 games focused on the Winters family and their relationship with the mold. But Resident Evil 9 is clearly bringing the games full circle. We are going back to Raccoon City, but we are also going back to characters that were established in the first story arc. This makes me believe that Resident Evil 9 will set up the series to return to the main characters. If we get a Resident Evil 10, then that should be the start of a new story arc. And seeing just how well received the Resident Evil remakes have been in recent years, I bet Capcom are going to use 9 to set up the return of the fan favorite characters. After all, I don't care what anyone else says, it's been far too long since Jill's had her own game. Now, I know that people want to see what is happening with Leon, Claire, Chris, and the rest of the gang, and I think Resident Evil 10 will be the one to finally bring them back. Now, some people have speculated that we can hear Chris or Leon in the trailer, but I don't think so. This person seems to react in shock to whatever infected it is that they encounter.
We need to keep our voices down.
Have you seen the same shit I've seen?
I don't think either Chris or Leon by this point would talk like this. They have both fought against so many monsters by now, so I think this is a new character. But that doesn't mean we won't see one of these characters. There's still room for a twist, and I'm sure if we were going to see one of these characters, that they wouldn't throw it in the trailer like they did for Resident Evil Village. Either way, this trailer has so many cool little details that it has me so excited for Resident Evil again. I really hope this one puts horror back into focus, and I will 100% be playing it over on the second channel, and hopefully making some content on this one too. If you did enjoy the video, don't forget to leave it a like, subscribe if you want more horror secrets and lore videos like this one, and most of all, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.